They built an empire on banking and ambition, kings of Florence in all but name. Their palaces gleamed with stolen gold and priceless art. Their power reached the Vatican itself. But behind the grandeur, beneath the velvet cloaks and polished marble, there was another story. A secret history whispered in shaded courtyards and hushed bedchambers. The Medici men, masters of cunning and culture, were also masters of desire. They took what they wanted, and sometimes what they wanted was not their wife. These were the women who captivated them, who shared their beds and their secrets, who dared to stand by their side in the public eye or hide in the shadows. Their lives were dramas filled with passion, intrigue, power, and often devastating tragedy. Get ready to peel back the layers of history and meet the real women who truly rocked the Medici world. Number 1, Bianca Cappello. Bianca Cappello was a Venetian beauty, a woman whose name became synonymous with scandal and power in Florence. She was born into a noble, though not incredibly wealthy, Venetian family in 1548. Her father, Bartolomeo Cappello, was a patrician, a man of some standing in the Republic of Venice. Bianca was known for her striking looks from a young age, fair skin, golden hair, and intelligent eyes. But it was her spirit, her vivacity that truly set her apart. She was accustomed to a certain level of privilege, but her ambition, it turned out, far outstripped her inherited position. When Bianca was still a teenager, barely 15 years old, her life took a dramatic turn. She met a young Florentine, a man named Pietro Bonaventure. Pietro was not of the high nobility, nor was he particularly wealthy. He worked for a Florentine bank, the Salviati Bank in Venice. Their meeting was a secret, their romance clandestine. Pietro was charming, perhaps, but he was also reckless. Bianca, young and infatuated, made a choice that would forever alter her destiny and send shockwaves through both Venice and Florence. On a night in November 1563, she eloped with Pietro, leaving her family's grand Venetian palace behind. The elopement was a monumental scandal. For a noble Venetian girl to run off with a mere bank clerk was an insult of the highest order to her family's honor. Her father, Bartolomeo, was furious. He demanded justice. The Venetian authorities, respecting the outrage of a patrician family, issued an arrest warrant for Pietro and even placed a bounty on his head. So Bianca and Pietro fled to Florence, seeking refuge in the very heart of Medici power. They hoped that Florence, as Venice's rival, would offer them protection. Pietro's family welcomed them, though they were perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of the scandal their son had brought upon them. Bianca found herself living in relatively modest circumstances, a stark contrast to her Venetian upbringing. She tried to make the best of it, even having a daughter with Pietro, a girl named Virginia. But she was not content. Her eyes, her ambition, sought something more. Enter Francesco de Medici. He was the eldest son of Cosimo I, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. Francesco was already married to Joanna of Austria, a solemn, devout, and somewhat melancholic Habsburg princess. Their marriage was a political alliance, cold and largely loveless. Francesco was a man of science, an alchemist, and often introverted. But he also had a passionate, if sometimes volatile, nature beneath his reserved exterior. It is not entirely clear how Bianca first came to Francesco's attention. Some say she was introduced through Pietro's connections at court, where he tried to gain favor. Others suggest Francesco saw her by chance. What is certain is that once he saw her, he was captivated. Bianca's beauty, her lively spirit, and her sophisticated charm were a stark contrast to his demure and often sickly wife, Joanna. Francesco, despite his ducal duties, began to seek Bianca out. Their affair started around 1564, just a year after Bianca's scandalous arrival in Florence. It was not a secret for long. Francesco showered Bianca with gifts, with attention, and soon with a lavish residence. He even established a pawn shop in Florence, not for financial gain, but to provide a cover story for the enormous sums of money he was spending on Bianca. This open patronage of a married woman, especially one with such a notorious past, was a major source of embarrassment and anger for Cosimo I, Francesco's father, the Grand Duke. Cosimo had worked tirelessly to build the Medici name, to legitimize their rule, and this blatant scandal threatened to undermine everything. Cosimo tried to intervene. He sent Pietro Bonaventure, Bianca's husband, away from Florence, hoping to separate the lovers. But it was too late. Francesco was utterly devoted to Bianca. He brought Pietro back, attempting to appease his father by appearing to keep the peace. However, Pietro, now aware of his wife's powerful lover, and perhaps emboldened by his new status, became arrogant and reckless. He became involved in a street brawl, a fatal confrontation that led to his murder in 1572. The circumstances of Pietro's death are murky. Some believe it was an act of revenge by a cuckolded husband whose wife Pietro had insulted. Others whispered that Francesco, or his agents, had a hand in it, removing the inconvenient husband who stood in the way of his obsession. The official story was that Pietro died in a street fight. Whatever the truth, Pietro's death left Bianca a widow, free to pursue her relationship with Francesco more openly. Even after Pietro's death, Bianca's position remained precarious as long as Grand Duchess Joanna was alive. Joanna was a Habsburg, sister to the Holy Roman Emperor. Her position was unassailable. Bianca, despite Francesco's devotion, was still seen as a low-born interloper, a courtesan by many, especially by the Habsburg family and by Cosimo I, who deeply disliked her. She continued to live in luxury provided by Francesco, but she was not acknowledged at court. She was not the Grand Duchess. Then, in April 1574, Cosimo I, the formidable Grand Duke, died. Francesco officially became Grand Duke Francesco, the first day Medici. His power was now absolute, at least within Tuscany. This changed everything for Bianca. Francesco's love for her remained undimmed. He longed to make her his official consort, to give her the status she craved and he believed she deserved, but Joanna, his wife, was still alive. She continued to fulfill her duties as Grand Duchess, though her health was failing. She gave birth to 8 children, but only 2 daughters, Eleonora and Anna, survived infancy. The Medici family desperately needed a male heir. When Joanna became pregnant again in 1578, there was hope, but the birth was difficult. Joanna gave birth to a stillborn son and died shortly after, in April 1578, at the age of 31. Her death, though tragic, cleared the path for Bianca. Within 2 months of Joanna's funeral, Francesco secretly married Bianca in a private ceremony. The speed of the second marriage fueled rumors. Many whispered that Bianca had poisoned Joanna, or that Joanna's death had been deliberately hastened to allow Francesco to marry his mistress. These rumors, though never proven, clung to Bianca's name for the rest of her life, adding to her notorious reputation. The official marriage, a lavish public affair, took place on June 12, 1579, just over a year after Joanna's death. Bianca Cappello, the scandalous Venetian eloper, was now Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Her elevation was met with outrage by many in Florence and beyond. The Habsburg family was furious, seeing it as an insult to their deceased sister. The Florentine nobility, many of whom had despised Bianca, felt their own lineage and pride had been trampled by the rise of a woman of such questionable origins. Even Francesco's own family, particularly his younger brother Ferdinando, a cardinal in Rome, strongly opposed the marriage. Ferdinando saw Bianca as a threat to the Medici line, a woman who had manipulated his brother and brought dishonor to their ducal house. Bianca, now Grand Duchess, tried to win over the Florentine court. She dispensed favors, held lavish entertainments, and engaged in charitable acts. She was intelligent and politically astute, and she clearly sought to legitimize her position. She presented Francesco with an illegitimate son, Antonio de Medici, claiming him as their own. It was widely believed that Antonio was not Bianca's biological son, but rather the son of a laundress, whom Bianca adopted and presented as hers to secure the succession, or at least to provide Francesco with a son. This attempt to secure a male heir, even through deception, further illustrated Bianca's desperate need to solidify her power and position. Francesco accepted Antonio as his own, showering him with affection and legitimacy. Despite her newly acquired title, Bianca never truly overcame the deep-seated prejudice against her. Her notoriety was ingrained. She lived under a constant cloud of suspicion and resentment. Her relationship with Ferdinando, Francesco's brother, remained deeply hostile. Ferdinando was a powerful cardinal influential in Rome, and he saw himself as the true protector of the Medici legacy. He believed Bianca was ruining his brother and threatening the dynasty. The story of Bianca and Francesco reached its dramatic climax in October 1587, and the Grand Ducal couple was staying at the Villa Poggio a Caiano, a Medici country retreat. Ferdinando, the cardinal, was also there, having apparently reconciled with his brother. On October 9th, Francesco fell ill with a fever, followed by vomiting and stomach pain. Bianca, who was nursing him, also fell ill with similar symptoms a few days later. Both died within hours of each other on October 19th. Francesco was 46, Bianca 40. Their sudden, near-simultaneous deaths immediately sparked intense speculation. The most persistent and widely believed rumor was that they had been poisoned, and the prime suspect in the minds of many was Ferdinando. The narrative quickly formed Ferdinando, eager to rid himself of the despised Bianca and assume the Grand Duchy, had poisoned both his brother and his sister-in-law. This theory was fueled by the rapid succession of deaths, the known animosity between Ferdinando and Bianca, and the convenience of the outcome for Ferdinando, who immediately became Grand Duke Ferdinando I of Medici. For centuries, this poisoning theory was accepted as fact. Historians debated the specific poison used, often pointing to arsenic. However, in the 21st century, modern scientific investigations have cast doubt on this long-held belief. In 2004, researchers exhumed the remains of Francesco and Bianca from their Medici tombs. Analysis of bone fragments and tissue samples, particularly from Francesco's bones, revealed high levels of arsenic. This seemed to confirm the poisoning theory. But further investigation examining the visceral remains believed to be from Francesco found evidence of Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite responsible for malaria. The symptoms described in historical accounts, particularly the fever and rapid decline, are consistent with a virulent form of malaria, especially the cerebral malaria that can be fatal. This new evidence suggests that Francesco and Bianca likely died of natural causes, specifically a severe outbreak of malaria. The presence of arsenic could be explained by historical practices of using arsenic-based remedies for various ailments, or by the post-mortem embalming processes. However, the exact cause of death remains a subject of some historical debate, with advocates for both poisoning and natural causes presenting their arguments. The ambiguity, the lingering shadow of suspicion, only adds to the notorious legacy of Bianca Cappello. She lived a life of extraordinary drama and scandal, from her elopement to her controversial marriage, and ultimately to her mysterious death. She was a woman who dared to challenge the strictures of her time, to rise from notoriety to Grand Duchess, leaving behind a story that continues to fascinate and horrify in equal measure. Her reputation as the Venetian enchantress who brought misfortune to the Medici still echoes through the marble halls of Florence. Number 2, Camilla Martelli. Camilla Martelli's story is one of quiet determination, scandalous defiance, and the enduring power of love, even in the twilight years of a formidable ruler. She was not born into high nobility, but rather into the Florentine gentry. Her family, the Martelli, were respectable, long established, and well connected within Florence, but they were not of the ducal or even the highest aristocratic ranks. Camilla herself was born around 1545. She was known for her beauty and her gentle demeanor. Her background, while good, certainly did not position her to become the consort of the Grand Duke of Tuscany. The Grand Duke in question was Cosimo, the first de Medici, the man who had truly forged the Grand Duchy, transforming the Medici family from powerful bankers into sovereign rulers. Cosimo was a complex figure, intelligent, ruthless, deeply religious, and devoted to his family and the state. He had been married to the formidable and beloved Eleonora de Toledo, a Spanish noblewoman who brought great wealth and prestige to the Medici and served as a strong political partner. Together, Cosimo and Eleonora had a large family and solidified the Medici dynasty. But in 1562, Eleonora died, followed shortly after by several of their children, victims of malaria. Cosimo was devastated. He withdrew from public life, suffering from ill health and profound grief. It was during this period of personal anguish and declining health that Camilla Martelli entered Cosimo's life. She became his mistress sometime around 1564 or 1565, just a couple of years after Eleonora's death. Cosimo was in his mid-40s, and Camilla was a young woman in her late teens or early 20s. Their relationship began discreetly, but Cosimo, perhaps in his grief and his growing detachment from formal court life, found solace and companionship in Camilla. She was gentle, attentive, and provided him with a sense of comfort that had been missing since Eleonora's passing. Their relationship was a source of scandal from the very beginning, primarily because of Camilla's relatively humble birth. While her family was respectable, she was not considered a suitable partner for the Grand Duke, especially after his marriage to a princess of Eleonora's stature. The Florentine nobility and the Medici family themselves were deeply disapproving. They saw Camilla as a threat to the family's prestige and a potential source of future complications regarding the succession. Cosimo had already designated his eldest surviving son, Francesco, as his successor. But a new child born to Camilla could introduce instability. Despite the widespread disapproval, Cosimo grew increasingly attached to Camilla. In 1568, Camilla gave birth to their daughter, Virginia de Medici. This birth further solidified her place in Cosimo's affections and deepened the scandal. An illegitimate child, particularly a daughter, was less of a threat to the succession than a son would have been, but it was still another complication. Cosimo acknowledged Virginia as his daughter, and she was raised within the Medici household. As Cosimo's health continued to decline, he became more reliant on Camilla. He gradually began to withdraw from the day-to-day governance of Tuscany, effectively abdicating his power to his son Francesco in 1564. This semi-retirement allowed him to live more privately and more openly with Camilla. However, the pressure from his family, particularly his sons Francesco and Ferdinando, to end the relationship, or at least to keep it discreet, remained immense. They feared that Cosimo, weakened by age and illness, was being unduly influenced by Camilla and her family. Cosimo, however, was a stubborn man. He had always been a ruler who did as he pleased, and he was not about to change in his final years. In 1570, he made a decision that shocked the Florentine court and cemented Camilla's notorious status. He secretly married her. This was a morganatic marriage, meaning Camilla did not gain the title of Grand Duchess, nor did her children Virginia have a claim to the throne. She was simply styled Signora Camilla, or Our Lady Camilla. Despite this legal formality, the fact that the Grand Duke had married his mistress, a woman of relatively low birth, was a monumental scandal. It was an affront to the established social order and to the Medici family's carefully cultivated image of legitimacy and grandeur. The marriage was deeply resented by Cosimo's children. Francesco, now ruling as Grand Duke, viewed Camilla with suspicion and disdain. He was concerned about the influence she might have over his ailing father and the resources that might be diverted to her or her family. Ferdinando, Cosimo's second son and a cardinal, also harbored strong negative feelings towards Camilla. He believed she was taking advantage of his father's infirmity and was a source of disgrace for the family. Camilla, now officially Cosimo's wife, tried to navigate her difficult position. She lived with Cosimo in his private apartments, caring for him in his declining years. She suffered from illnesses herself, including a severe fever that left her partially paralyzed. She was a constant companion to Cosimo, a source of comfort and affection. But her life was far from easy. She faced constant hostility from the Medici family, particularly Francesco and his wife, Joanna of Austria. Joanna, the Grand Duchess, found Camilla's presence highly offensive and often refused to acknowledge her. The court was divided, with some showing deference to Camilla out of respect for Cosimo, and others openly slighting her. Cosimo remained devoted to Camilla until his death. He died in April 1574, leaving Camilla in a profoundly vulnerable position. With her powerful protector gone, her enemies within the Medici family saw their chance. Grand Duke Francesco immediately moved to assert his authority over her. He confined Camilla to a monastery, the Murat convent, a common fate for royal widows or women who had become inconvenient. Her daughter Virginia was taken from her and raised by Francesco's court. Camilla's confinement was not absolute or harsh initially, but it was a clear signal of her diminished status and powerlessness. She was not allowed to leave the convent without permission, and her movements were heavily restricted. Francesco's intent was to prevent her from causing any further trouble or influence. She appealed to Pope Gregory XIII, seeking more freedom and protesting her confinement. The Pope, perhaps sympathetic to her plight or hoping to gain some leverage over the Medici, ordered her release from Murat. However, Francesco was determined to keep her under control. After a brief period of freedom, she was confined again, this time to the convent of Santa Monica in Florence. This was a pattern that would continue for years. She was occasionally allowed out for specific reasons, such as attending her daughter Virginia's wedding. Virginia, despite her illegitimate birth and her mother's scandalous marriage, eventually made a good match, marrying Cesare d'Este, Duke of Modena, in 1586. This marriage was a testament to the Medici's pragmatic approach to family alliances, despite their disdain for Camilla. And Camilla's life after Cosimo's death was largely one of imprisonment and diminishing influence. She endured the reigns of both Francesco I and his brother Ferdinando I. Ferdinando, who succeeded Francesco, also harbored resentment towards Camilla, viewing her as a symbol of the old Grand Duke's indiscretions. He kept her largely confined, though sometimes moving her between convents and Medici villas, ensuring she remained isolated from the outside world. She wrote letters pleading for more freedom, for access to her daughter, and for financial support, often feeling she was not being treated with the dignity due to a former wife of a Grand Duke, even a morganatic one. Camilla Martelli died in 1590, 16 years after Cosimo. Her later years were marked by isolation and quiet struggle. Her notoriety was not born of her own ambition or malice, but from the circumstances of her relationship with a powerful man. She was a woman who offered comfort and companionship to a grieving ruler, and for that she paid a heavy price in social ostracism and lifelong confinement. Her story stands as a testament to the rigid social hierarchies of the time and the unforgiving nature of court politics, where even genuine affection could lead to a life of notorious obscurity. She dared to love a Grand Duke, and that choice forever marked her as a figure of scandal in the annals of Medici history. Number 3. Eleonora degli Albizzi. Eleonora degli Albizzi was a woman whose life was entangled in the complex and often treacherous web of Medici courtly affections. Her story is less about grand public scandal and more about the intimate, often clandestine affairs that fueled whispers and rivalries within the ducal family itself. She was born around 1543 into a prominent Florentine noble family, the Albizzi. The Albizzi were one of the oldest and most powerful families in Florence, historical rivals of the Medici. However, by the mid-16th century, after Cosimo I de' Medici had solidified his power as Grand Duke, the Albizzi, like other noble families, were forced to align themselves with the reigning dynasty. This intricate balance of power and old rivalries often played out in personal relationships. Eleonora was a beautiful woman, known for her captivating charm and intelligence. Her aristocratic background meant she was well-versed in courtly manners and sophisticated conversation, making her a natural fit for the Grand Ducal court. Her life took a significant turn when she caught the eye of Grand Duke Cosimo, the first de' Medici himself. This was after the death of his beloved first wife, Eleonora di Toledo, and before his morganatic marriage to Camilla Martelli, Cosimo, in his grief and declining health, had affairs with several women seeking solace and companionship. Eleonora degli Albizzi was one of these women. Their relationship began sometime in the mid-1560s. It was a secret affair, as Cosimo had already designated his son Francesco as his successor, and was trying to maintain a semblance of decorum after Eleonora di Toledo's death. However, court secrets rarely remained secret for long. Eleonora's affair with the Grand Duke was whispered about, causing unease among the family and the court. She even bore Cosimo an illegitimate son named Don Giovanni. This child, though acknowledged by Cosimo, added to the complexity of the family dynamics, especially given the ongoing scandal of Camilla Martelli and her daughter Virginia. However, Eleonora's story takes a more intriguing twist. While she was involved with the aging Cosimo I, she also caught the eye of his son, Francesco, the future Grand Duke. Francesco was known for his passionate and often volatile nature, and he was already unhappily married to Joanna of Austria, a match arranged for political expediency rather than affection. His infamous long-term affair with Bianca Cappello would become the defining relationship of his life. But before Bianca's complete dominance, Eleonora degli Albizzi was a significant figure in his romantic entanglements. It is believed that Francesco had an affair with Eleonora while she was simultaneously involved with his father. This overlapping of affections, a son pursuing his father's mistress, added a layer of scandalous intrigue to the Medici court. It was a clear sign of the dysfunctional relationships within the ducal family and Francesco's defiance of convention. He found in Eleonora a lively, intelligent companion, a contrast to his demure wife, Joanna. Eleonora eventually gave birth to a son by Francesco, also named Don Piero or Pedro. This meant she had borne illegitimate children to both the reigning Grand Duke and his successor. This fact alone made her position incredibly complex and precarious. She was a woman who, through her beauty and charm, had managed to captivate two of the most powerful Medici men of her generation. However, her prominence as a mistress of Francesco was relatively short-lived compared to Bianca Cappello's enduring hold on him. As Francesco's passion for Bianca grew, Eleonora's star began to wane. While Bianca was relentless in her pursuit of power and complete devotion from Francesco, and she would tolerate no rivals. The court, already rife with gossip and intrigue, would have seen Eleonora as a clear threat to Bianca's growing influence. Eleonora eventually married a man named Carlo Panciatici. This marriage, likely arranged by the Medici to remove her from the courtly affections of Francesco, was a step down for a woman who had been the mistress of a Grand Duke. Carlo Panciatici was a member of another prominent Florentine family, but the marriage offered Eleonora a more conventional, if less glamorous, existence away from the immediate glare of ducal intrigue. But Eleonora's story did not end there. Her association with the Medici, especially with Francesco, proved to be a dangerous connection. In 1579, a serious scandal erupted involving Eleonora and her husband, Carlo Panciatici. I learned how to be Francesco in involvement in a plot to assassinate Grand Duke Francesco. The details of this alleged conspiracy are murky and debated by historians. Some accounts suggest it was a genuine plot, perhaps driven by remaining anti-Medici sentiments among certain Florentine families, or by dissatisfaction with Francesco's rule and Bianca's scandalous influence. Others argue it was a fabrication orchestrated by Francesco and Bianca themselves to remove political rivals and consolidate their power, perhaps even to eliminate a lingering threat from Eleonora. Whatever the truth, the accusations were severe. Eleonora and Carlo were arrested. Under interrogation, Carlo Panciatici confessed, supposedly implicating his wife and others. The trials were swift and brutal. Carlo Panciatici was executed for treason. Eleonora, due to her connections and perhaps the sensitivity of her past affairs with the Grand Dukes, was spared execution but suffered a different, arguably crueler fate. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Murat convent, a place of confinement for women who had fallen from grace or were deemed politically inconvenient by the Medici. This was the same convent where Camilla Martelli, Cosimo I's morganatic wife, was confined. Her sons Don Giovanni by Cosimo I and Don Piero by Francesco I were also affected by their mother's downfall. While they were still acknowledged as Medici, their illegitimacy and their mother's disgrace meant they were kept at a distance from the main line of succession. Don Giovanni went on to have a military career, and Don Piero lived a more obscure life. Eleonora degli Albizzi spent the remainder of her life in the harsh confines of the Murat convent. Her story is a poignant example of the precarious position of women, even those of noble birth, who became entangled with powerful rulers. While her beauty and charm allowed her to ascend to the intimate circles of Medici power, her lack of legitimate status and the ruthless politics of the court ultimately led to her downfall. Her notoriety was not just for her illicit relationships, but for the dramatic and tragic consequences that followed, culminating in her husband's execution and her own lifelong imprisonment. She vanished from the public eye, her once sparkling presence extinguished by the shadows of political intrigue and unforgiving justice. Her legacy remains a reminder of the perils of passion in a world dominated by dynastic ambition. Number 4, Barbara Rafficani Salamandra. Barbara Rafficani Salamandra is a figure steeped in the darkest chapters of Medici history. Her notoriety is not built on grand courtly scandal or a rise to power, but rather on her intimate connection to the first Duke of Florence, Alessandro de Medici, and the brutal circumstances of his life and death. She was not a noblewoman, but rather a woman from the lower strata of Florentine society, a courtesan or a woman of easy virtue, whose beauty and charm drew the attention of the ruthless Duke. Her origins are obscure, but her name is forever linked to one of the most violent and controversial rulers the Medici ever produced. Alessandro de' Medici was an illegitimate son, likely of Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici, himself an illegitimate son of Giuliano de' Medici, or possibly of Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino. He was imposed upon Florence as its first duke by Emperor Charles V in 1532 after the siege of Florence. His rule was marked by tyranny, extravagance, and a brutal suppression of dissent. He was feared and despised by many Florentines, particularly the Republican faction who longed for the days of the Florentine Republic. Alessandro was known for his licentious lifestyle, his debauchery, and his many affairs. He treated women as conquests, often forcing himself upon them. Barbara Rafficani Salamandra was one of the women who became entangled in Alessandro's web. She was one of his many mistresses, though perhaps a favored one. She lived in a house near the Palazzo Medici, granted to her by the Duke, a common arrangement for a powerful man's favored mistress. The relationship was not one of tender affection, but rather a reflection of Alessandro's domineering and predatory nature. He used her for his pleasure, and she, a woman of limited options, accepted his patronage. Their relationship was a public secret, a visible testament to Alessandro's unrestrained power and disregard for social norms. The true notoriety of Barbara Rafficani Salamandra stems from her role, or rather, her unfortunate presence, on the night of Alessandro's assassination. The Duke's cousin, Lorenzino de' Medici, known as Lorenzaccio, was a complex and enigmatic figure. He was a close companion to Alessandro, sharing in his vices and pleasures, but secretly harboring a deep resentment for the Duke's tyranny and a desire to restore the Florentine Republic. Lorenzino plotted Alessandro's murder meticulously. He knew Alessandro's weaknesses, his lust, and his trust in Lorenzino. On the night of January 5th, 1537, Lorenzino lured Alessandro to his house. The pretext for the meeting was a tryst with Barbara Rafficani Salamandra. Lorenzino promised Alessandro that Barbara, who was supposedly very beautiful and desirable, would be waiting for him. This was a classic honey trap, a way to get Alessandro to let down his guard and come to a secluded location without his usual retinue of guards. Alessandro, ever eager for a new conquest, fell for the deception. He arrived at Lorenzino's house, dismissed his guards, and entered alone, expecting to find Barbara. Instead, he found Lorenzino and a single accomplice, a mercenary named Michele Tavorne, or Scoronconcolo. What followed was a brutal and chaotic struggle. Alessandro, realizing the trap, fought back fiercely, but he was ultimately overwhelmed. Lorenzino and Scoronconcolo stabbed him repeatedly, leaving him for dead in the bedchamber. The assassination was grisly and bloody, a shocking act that sent reverberations across Europe. Though Barbara Rafficani Salamandra was not physically present in the room during the murder itself. Some accounts suggest she was indeed waiting in an adjoining room, completely unaware of the true purpose of the meeting, perhaps told to wait for Alessandro. Other accounts indicate she was merely a lure, a name used to entice the Duke, and might not have been at the house at all. Regardless of her exact whereabouts, her name was intimately tied to the plot's execution. She was the bait, the reason Alessandro went to his death willingly. Her beauty, or at least the promise of it, was the instrument of his downfall. The aftermath of the assassination was chaotic. Lorenzino escaped Florence, hailed as a liberator by some, condemned as a traitor by others. The Medici faction quickly consolidated power, installing Cosimo I de' Medici as the new duke. Barbara Rafficani Salamandra, the woman whose name was uttered in the context of the assassination, found herself in an extremely precarious position. She was arrested and interrogated. The authorities wanted to know everything she knew about Lorenzino's plot, her relationship with Alessandro, and any accomplices. Her testimony, if any, is not widely documented, but it is clear she was not implicated as a co-conspirator in the murder itself. She was simply a pawn in a much larger game. However, her association with the assassinated Duke and the circumstances of his death made her a notorious figure. She was a woman who symbolized the Duke's excesses and the dark underbelly of his reign. Her brief moment in the historical spotlight was tragic and involuntary. After her interrogation, Barbara Rafficani Salamandra seems to have faded from the historical record. Her fate is largely unknown. She was likely released, perhaps exiled, or simply vanished into obscurity, her life forever scarred by that one bloody night. She was not a grand lady of the court, nor a powerful political player. She was a woman caught in the crosscurrents of history, her beauty used as a tool in a political assassination. Her notoriety is not about what she did, but what she represented, and the horrifying event she was inextricably linked to. She is a chilling reminder of the dangers that lay hidden beneath the glittering surface of Medici power, and the brutal reality of their rule. Number 5, Fioretta Guarini. Fioretta Guarini's story is one of tragic love, hidden lineage, and an astonishing legacy. She was a woman of humble origins, born into a Florentine family of artisans or minor tradesmen. Her exact birth date is unknown, but she lived in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Her life was largely undocumented, as was common for women of her social standing, until her name became intertwined with the powerful Medici family. Her notoriety stems not from her own actions or a life of public scandal, but from the simple yet profound fact that she bore an illegitimate son to a prominent Medici man, a son who would ascend to the highest office in the Catholic Church. The Medici man in question was Giuliano de' Medici, the younger brother of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Giuliano was known for his charm, his athletic prowess, and his good looks. He was a beloved figure in Florence, a stark contrast to his more serious and intellectual brother, Lorenzo. Giuliano was also a keen participant in the city's vibrant cultural life, a patron of the arts, and a celebrated jousting champion. It was in this dynamic, an often libertine Florentine society, that Giuliano and Fioretta's paths crossed. Their relationship was clandestine. Giuliano, as a prominent Medici, was expected to make a strategic marriage, but he was also free to pursue romantic liaisons. Fioretta, a young woman of no great status, would have been an unlikely match for him in any public sense. Their affair resulted in a pregnancy. In May 1478, Fioretta gave birth to a son. They named him Giulio. However, the joy of the birth was immediately overshadowed by profound tragedy. Just a month before Giulio's birth, on April 26, 1478, Florence was rocked by the infamous Pazzi conspiracy. During Mass in the Duomo, a group of conspirators, backed by the Pazzi family and even Pope Sixtus IV, launched a brutal attack on the Medici brothers. Lorenzo the Magnificent managed to escape, though wounded. But Giuliano de' Medici, Fioretta's lover and the father of her newborn son, was brutally murdered. He was stabbed 19 times on the altar steps, his life tragically cut short at the age of 25. Fioretta Guerini was left a single mother, grieving the loss of her beloved, and with an illegitimate infant son whose father was now dead. Her exact fate immediately after Giuliano's death is not well documented. Some accounts suggest she died shortly after childbirth or soon after Giuliano's murder, perhaps due to complications from childbirth or the stress of the events. Other sources suggest she simply vanished from public view, entrusting her child to the Medici family. What is clear is that young Giulio was immediately taken into the care of the Medici family, specifically by his uncle, Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo, despite his deep grief for his brother, showed remarkable care for his nephew. He took Giulio into his own household, raising him alongside his own legitimate children, including the future Pope Leo X, Giovanni de' Medici, and Piero the Unfortunate. This was a critical turning point for Giulio and for Fioretta's legacy. Without Lorenzo's immediate and compassionate intervention, Giulio's life would have been very different, likely one of obscurity. Giulio de' Medici, despite his illegitimate birth, received a full Medici education. He was trained in law, theology, and the arts, surrounded by the greatest minds of the Florentine Renaissance. He grew up intelligent, cultured, and pragmatic. His illegitimate status, however, always presented a challenge, especially if he sought a career in the church, where legitimacy was often a requirement for higher office. But the Medici were nothing if not resourceful. When Lorenzo's son Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X in 1513, he immediately worked to legitimize his cousin Giulio. Pope Leo X issued a special dispensation declaring that Giulio was, in fact, born of a legitimate marriage. This was achieved by claiming that Giuliano de' Medici had secretly married Fioretta Guerini, even if it was a clandestine, unrecorded ceremony. This legal fiction, created by a sitting pope, cleared the path for Giulio's ascent. With his status now officially legitimate, at least in the eyes of the church, Giulio de' Medici rose rapidly through the ecclesiastical ranks. He became Archbishop of Florence, then a cardinal, and a trusted advisor to his cousin Pope Leo X. He was a key figure in the Renaissance papacy, deeply involved in politics, art, and the intricate diplomacy of the era. And then, in 1523, the unimaginable happened. Following the death of Pope Adrian VI, Giulio de' Medici was elected pope. He took the name Clement VII. The illegitimate son of Fioretta Guerini, born in secret and raised by his uncle, now sat on the papal throne, one of the most powerful positions in the world. Pope Clement VII's papacy was one of immense challenges and significant historical events. He famously denied King Henry VIII of England's annulment request, leading to the English Reformation. He also faced the devastating sack of Rome in 1527 by imperial troops, a traumatic event that shattered the city and deeply impacted his pontificate. He also was the Pope who commissioned Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel and supported many other great artists. Fioretta Guerini herself remained largely a shadow in the historical narrative. Her existence is confirmed by various contemporary sources and, most significantly, by the elaborate legal fictions created to legitimize her son. Her obscurity, however, made her story all the more poignant. She was not a woman who sought power or fame, but her personal life, her love for Giuliano, resulted in a child who would shape the course of European history. The fact that the powerful Pope Clement VII was the son of a commoner mistress, legitimized only by papal decree, was a fact known within the highest echelons of the church and among the powerful families of Europe. This hidden lineage, the secret of his birth, made Fioretta Guerini a notorious figure by proxy. She represented the hidden, illicit side of the Medici family, the private passions that sometimes yielded the most unexpected and monumental results. Her legacy is literally etched into the foundations of the Vatican and the history of the world. She was the mother of a pope, a testament to how even the most humble connections could, in the unpredictable world of the Medici, lead to unimaginable heights. Number 6. Lucrezia Donati. Lucrezia Donati stands as one of the most iconic figures among the Medici mistresses, embodying the romantic and artistic spirit of the Florentine Renaissance. Her story is intrinsically linked to Lorenzo de' Medici, famously known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, the de facto ruler of Florence during its golden age. Lucrezia was born around 1447 into a prominent Florentine family, the Donati. While her family was noble, they were not among the inner circle of the Medici's closest allies or rivals. She was known for her exceptional beauty, a quality that captivated the young Lorenzo. Lorenzo de' Medici was a statesman, a poet, a diplomat, and a generous patron of the arts. He was the grandson of Cosimo the Elder and the son of Piero the Goody, inheriting the mantle of Medici power in Florence. In 1469, at the age of 20, Lorenzo married Clarice Orsini, a Roman noblewoman. Their marriage was a political alliance designed to bolster Medici prestige and connections with the Roman aristocracy and the papacy. Clarice was devout, traditional, and not particularly attuned to the intellectual and artistic vibrancy of Florence. It was a respectful, if not passionate, union that produced several children, securing the Medici line. However, even before his marriage, Lorenzo's heart was drawn to Lucrezia Donati. Their affair began in the late 1460s, around the time Lorenzo was coming into his own as the head of the Medici family. Lucrezia was young, intelligent, and famously beautiful, with golden hair and a captivating presence. She was everything Clarice was not: vivacious, worldly, and immersed in the Florentine culture that Lorenzo adored. Their relationship was not a secret. While discretion was usually the norm for such affairs, Lorenzo, even as a young man, was daring and open about his affection for Lucrezia. He showered her with gifts, wrote passionate poems in her honor, and celebrated her beauty in public forums. She became his muse, the inspiration for much of his early poetry. His most famous collection of love poems, the Canzoniere, is widely believed to be dedicated to her. In these verses he praised her beauty, her intelligence, and her ability to ignite his soul. This public display of affection for a mistress, even by a powerful figure like Lorenzo, was unusual and certainly contributed to Lucrezia's notoriety. It showed a defiance of societal expectations and a clear prioritization of personal desire over conventional propriety. Lucrezia's status as Lorenzo's muse, an acknowledged mistress, was a unique position. She was not merely a courtesan for hire, she was a woman he genuinely admired and loved, at least for a period. She held a special place in his affections and in the cultural life of Florence. She was present at public events where Lorenzo was honored, often seated in a prominent position, a clear signal of her favored status. This was a bold move for Lorenzo, signaling his unconventional character and willingness to challenge norms. One of the most famous examples of Lucrezia's public recognition was at the Grand Jousting tournament, held in Florence in 1469. This magnificent spectacle was organized by Lorenzo to celebrate the new Medici alliance with the Orsini family, his marriage to Clarice, but it was also a display of Medici power and a showcase for Lorenzo's own knightly prowess. Lorenzo rode into the arena bearing a banner designed by the artist Andrea del Verrocchio, which depicted a woman symbolizing his love. The motto on the banner was "Le temps revient," time returns, suggesting a return to a golden age. While the official reason for the joust was his marriage, it was widely understood that the beautiful woman depicted on his banner and the inspiration for his chivalric display was Lucrezia Donati. She was there, in the stands, honored by her lover's public dedication. This public acknowledgement made Lucrezia a notorious figure. She was the woman who held Lorenzo's heart, even as he was married to another. Her presence was a constant reminder of the informal power and influence that personal relationships could wield, even in a society that valued strict social order. For Clarice Orsini, Lorenzo's wife, Lucrezia's presence must have been a source of constant humiliation and frustration. Clarice was a quiet, dutiful wife focused on her family and religious obligations. The stark contrast between her and the dazzling Lucrezia, who embodied the very spirit of Florentine humanism and revelry, was a source of friction in the Medici household. Despite the intensity of their early romance and Lorenzo's poetic devotion, the affair between Lorenzo and Lucrezia eventually cooled. As Lorenzo grew older and his responsibilities as the true ruler of Florence became more pressing, his focus shifted. The demands of politics, diplomacy, and managing the Medici bank consumed his time and energy. His personal relationships became more discreet, and his youthful romanticism gave way to the pragmatic realities of power. The very public nature of his affair with Lucrezia, once a mark of his youthful audacity, might have become less desirable as he matured into a statesman. Lucrezia Donati eventually married a man named Niccolo Ardinghelli. This marriage was likely arranged to normalize her position in Florentine society. She bore him children and lived a more conventional life after her intense relationship with Lorenzo. However, her fame as Lorenzo's muse and mistress endured. She remained a symbol of the era's artistic and romantic ideals, a woman whose beauty and charm inspired one of the Renaissance's greatest patrons. Lucrezia's influence on Lorenzo the Magnificent was significant. She inspired some of his earliest and most passionate works of poetry, shaping his poetic voice and his romantic sensibility. She was a living embodiment of the ideals of beauty and love that characterized the Florentine Renaissance, an age that Lorenzo himself helped to define. Her story reminds us that even the most powerful men were susceptible to human emotions and passions, and that these personal relationships could profoundly impact the cultural and social landscape of the time. Lucrezia Donati's notoriety was not born of scandal in the same way as Bianca Cappello or Camilla Martelli, who challenged the very structure of ducal succession. Rather, her notoriety was gentler, a testament to her captivating beauty and the magnetic pull she exerted over a man who was destined to become one of history's greatest figures. She was the radiant star of Lorenzo's youthful affections, forever etched in the annals of Florentine history as the magnificent muse of the magnificent. Her legacy lives on in the verses she inspired, a silent testament to a love that dared to shine openly in an age of intricate power and hidden desires.